In today's video, I will be ranking every reload POI on this tier list. We recently just got a new map called Squid Grounds and it's honestly pretty awesome, so that now makes 4 reload maps. So I'm going to rank the named locations from each one. Now, of course, remember this is just my opinion, so be sure to let me know down in the comments where you would rank some of these locations. If you enjoy my videos, be sure to use code TuneSpider in the Fortnite item shop to support me. And now let's get to ranking. Alright, so I'm going to start with our very first map, which was Venture. This is basically a condensed chapter 1 map and it's awesome. I love it so much, and I think they did a great job with most of the locations on here. So starting with Pleasant Park, this is still one of the most iconic locations of all time. I still love the layout of it. There's always a lot of loot here, which I really like, and one of the things I find fun about this location is you have no idea what your fights are going to be like. You could have rooftop fights, you could have fights within the houses, you could have fights out in the open near the little soccer park area, or they can take place at the back of the houses. No matter what, I think there's a lot of variety at this location, which I really appreciate. And I'm not gonna lie, I just love dropping at Pleasant Park, so I'm gonna be putting this in Peak. Next up is Little Loot Lake, and there's not much to this location. I like the nostalgia of it because it's just a smaller loot lake from the original chapter 1 map. But just like that location, you have one house in the middle that has a few chests, not a ton. What is nice about this location though is the scattered loot that you can get. So if you're respawning and you're in bind, you need to land somewhere else that has some loot that's a little safer, you can always go here. It's definitely not the best location by any means, and there just really isn't a lot here, so I'm going to be putting this in the D tier. Now we're moving on to Tilted Towers, arguably the most iconic location of all time in Fortnite. No matter how many times this POI gets brought back, I always love it. There's just something about Tilted Towers and the way the buildings are, how much space there is in between, how much loot you get, how the fights go down at this location. It's always just so much fun, and there's always a little bit of a rush saying, yeah, let's just go Tilted, let's drop Tilted. It gives you those early chapter 1 vibes, so I'm going to be putting this in Peak. Moving on to Lone Lodge. So I was actually a fan of Lonely Lodge back in chapter 1. I thought it was an underrated POI. It was just kind of like my comfort location, I guess I could say. And I feel the same about Lone Lodge because it's basically the same thing. It just looks a little different since it's a different map. I always really like the cabin buildings. I like that we still have the big tower there, and the fights there are always interesting, especially being surrounded with the woods and the trees. Overall, I think it's a good location with a good amount of loot, so I'm going to be putting this in the A tier. Next up is Snobby Shoals, and to be honest with you, I've never been the biggest fan of like Snobby Shores, which this is just a smaller version of that, just because I think the fighting and the looting is kind of awkward at these locations. The buildings are fine, everything about it is just fine. Like, I don't love it, but I don't hate it. I do think it's a little awkward fighting at these locations, but they do have a good amount of loot, and you never know with the spot. It could either be a hot drop or it could be the chillest spot on the map, so I'm going to put it in the B tier because I think it's just solid. Moving on to Dusty Docks, I actually really like this spot. I like the mix of like Dirty Docks and Dusty Divot. I think it's pretty fun. Having the Dusty Divot type warehouse buildings on the docks is cool in my opinion. There is a ton of loot here. It's pretty easy to fight here because everything is pretty spread out. I think it's a good spot like Lone Lodge, so I'm going to be putting this in the A tier. Next up is Sandy Sheets, and I love seeing the old motel on the map. They did such a great job with the chapter 1 vibes for the Venture map, but let's be real, Sandy Sheets is nothing crazy. It's just the old motel. There is a good amount of loot here. Fighting here can be a little awkward. It's nice if you have an advantage being on the roof, but because it's just the small motel, I'm going to put this in the C tier. And then next up is Lazy Laps, and kind of similar to Motel. I like the spot. I love the feeling of that nostalgia from chapter 1 because this is the pool building. You have the little basketball court on the outside of it. There's a good amount of loot for how small the POI is. I'm not gonna lie, fighting here can be pretty fun. It's definitely not a crazy drop spot. I just think for a named location, it's alright. It's nothing special, so I'm gonna be putting this in the C tier as well. And then last but not least for this map is Retail Row, probably my favorite OG drop spot. I love the nostalgia of Retail Row. I love how the POI is built. You have these houses, and then you also have like this small little shopping center, and there is a good amount of loot here as well. So in my opinion, Retail Row is going to be going in Peak. Now we're moving on to Slurp Rush. So this map is mainly chapter 2, has a little bit of chapter 3 vibes to it. I like this one a lot. Honestly, I like all of the reload maps. I think they've done a great job with them. And we're going to start with Steamy Stacks, one of my favorite locations from the original chapter 2 map. It's really interesting having the stacks here on a smaller island. It's great for rotation though. The buildings are pretty much the same. There's a good amount of loot, pretty much identical to that chapter 2 Steamy Stacks. So this is going in the S tier. Next up is Boomin' Base, and this one is interesting because the layout for it is very vertical, and then all the loot and the buildings are on the side of this like long runway. Almost looks like where like a plane or a jet would take off. I think it's a solid location. There's a good amount of loot. I definitely don't get excited going to this location, but I think it's solid, so this is going in the B tier. Moving on to log jam logging. I love going here. The fighting here is always interesting. There's just a vibe to it that I really like. There's a good amount of loot here as well. It's not on the center of the map, so it's never really a hot drop. There's always going to be like 3 or 4 other people here. So I'm going to be putting this in the S tier. Next up is Fort Crumpet, and there's not much here. This is a smaller POI. I like the fort structure. I think there's a decent amount of loot here for a small POI. So I'm going to put this in the C tier. Moving on to Slurpy Swamp, I think it's very interesting that they made Slurpy Swamp the center of the map. I like the slurp aspect to it though, and be able to run through, get your full shield if you need to. And there's always interesting fights taking down at this place because of how this POI is built. I don't think it's a peak location, but I do think it goes in S. Moving on to Dirty Docks, I feel similar about this like I do with Dusty Docks. Dirty Docks was one of my favorite POIs from Chapter 2. It's a pretty big POI. There's a good amount of loot. It never gets too crazy there, so I'm putting this in the A tier. And then next up is Stilt Town. I like this spot. I like the little swamp area. I think it's fun. It feels very different from the other POIs, which I really like. And that's what I like about this map in general, is every POI feels very different. At Stilt Town, you can get a good amount of loot. It's pretty fun to fight there, so I'm going to be putting this in the A tier. Now moving on to Lockdown Lighthouse, there really isn't much to this. I love seeing the lighthouse, don't get me wrong. That is pretty nostalgic when you think of Chapter 2, but there's really only like 1 or 2 houses up there, not a ton of loot. You're way off the map. This is kind of where you want to go if you're like respawning and you need to like gather yourself, get some new loot, kind of regroup, but this just doesn't feel like a named location, so I'm going to be putting this in the D tier. Now moving on to the new Squid Grounds map. By the way, I love this map. I love this like Chapter 4, Chapter 5 feeling that it has to it. That's something I really like about all of these reload maps, is they feel so different. They're so different to play on. But starting with Costly Condos, I love this spot. I think it's really cool. I would love to be able to live there, to be honest with you. I think the condos are super nice. It can be a little weird to fight at just because of the different levels to the condos, and people can look through the windows pretty easily, but I think it's a good location and a good spot, so I'm going to put this in the A tier. Next up is Manager's Meals, and now there's not a ton to this. I really like the building and I like the different levels to it. It's a pretty simple POI, and then you have the dock in the back. You have a good amount of loot, so I'm going to be putting this in the B tier. And then next up is the Labyrinth, and this POI is huge. There is so much to it. You could loot here for the entire game. I definitely get lost a couple times when I go here. There's so many levels to it. I really like this POI. It's fun to fight at. It's fun to loot at. There's great surrounding areas where you can continue to go loot. In my opinion, I think this belongs in the peak tier. And then next up is Hectic Hedges. I mean, there really isn't much to this. I love seeing the hedges location. I just wish there was more buildings. There's not a lot of loot, but overall there's just not a lot here, so I'm going to be putting this in the D tier. Moving on to Phony Crossroads. I really like this location. Reminds me of Coney Crossroads a little bit, but of course they all have like that Squid Game vibe to them, especially with the buildings, which I really like. There's a good amount of loot here. There's variety with the buildings. It's a pretty big POI, so I'm going to put this in the S tier. Moving on to Designer Docks, I think this is the worst docks location out of the ones we've gotten in the reload maps. Like, don't get me wrong, it's not the worst reload POI, but it just doesn't have that same feel as the other dock locations, so I'm going to put this in the C tier. Moving on to Square Meals, I love this location. I love the different food sections. I think that's awesome. Finally get to see Butter Barn again. We got the pizza restaurant, we got the Durr Burger restaurant, taco restaurant, and then mixing that in with the Squid Games POIs, this place is awesome. This is going in peak. Moving on to Affluent Arrivals, there's not much to this location. It's definitely bigger than Hectic Hedges. There's like 1 or 2 buildings, and then of course there's a dock. It's right on the edge of the water. This is a nice chill spot if you want to go here and not really fight anybody, maybe like 1 or 2 people. It's also a good spot to go to if you respawn, so I'm going to put this in the C tier. Next up is Player's Power, and this is a pretty big POI. It feels very open, but it's not at the same time just because there's so much in the middle. There's a couple really big buildings. There's decent amount of loot here. It is on the edge of the map, so you probably won't get that many people here. At least I didn't experience that when I went there. Me personally, I think this is an A tier location. And then last but not least for this map, we have Red Greens. I love it so much. Reminds me so much of Fencing Fields, and that was like my favorite POI on Chapter 5 until they took it away. The fact that there's the red light green light game down below is so funny. Looting here is great. The buildings definitely give the Fencing Fields vibe. It's a pretty big location, so this is going in the peak tier. Now keep in mind for the rankings for this map, it is still fairly new, so it could change over time, but that is my ranking for now. And even though it got removed, I want to rank the POIs for Oasis, starting with Paradise Palms. Right away, I'm putting this in peak. Still one of my all-time favorite locations. I love fighting here. I love looting here. It's a big POI. It is a great location to center a desert map around. Moving on to fossil fields, I know there's not a ton here, so this is gonna be a little bit of bias, but I love it. I love the little dinosaur statues. It's easy to loot here. You get a decent amount of loot. I like fighting here, so this is going in A tier. Moving on to lizard links, reminds me so much of the golf course from chapter 1. I love having this location on the map. I always like fighting at the links locations, and this one is definitely no different, but I'm going to put this in the A tier. Moving on to Snobby Sands. This is another great location. There's so much loot here. All these houses are separated, so you're able to gather yourself, get your loot, and then there's different ways to fight here, which is fun. You can be fighting on the rooftops, or you can kind of meet in the middle and fight. I like that there's a good amount of variety, so I'm going to put this in the S tier. Next up is Twisted Trailers, and I like landing here. It's kind of a smaller location. You can get a good amount of loot. Reminds me of the trailer location from chapter 1, except there's more to it, which I like. So this would be going in the B tier. Next up is Sunburnt Shafts. I love the variety to it. There's a lot of loot. I like being able to go underground. It's fun to fight at. So I'm going to be putting this in the peak tier. Moving on to Shady Springs, another big POI that's pretty spread out with a good amount of loot. There's multiple buildings here. There's easy ways to rotate in and out of here. And overall, it's just a good spot to go to. So this is going in the S tier. Moving on to Guaco Town. I like this spot. I honestly feel that it's kind of underrated. There's a few houses. There's some docks on the back. There's a couple other buildings. There's a little gas station. There's actually quite a bit that you can loot here, and you can get some decent loot from this spot. The only thing that sucks is it's far away from everything, so if you want to get an action right away, you got a ways to go. Other than that, I think it's a good spot, so this is going in the A tier. And then last but not least, we have Adobes. I mean, this is a great spot. Reminds you so much of chapter 1, right? There's so much loot here, so many buildings. It's great for fighting. Like I mentioned, it just gives you that desert chapter 1 vibes that I really like. So in my opinion, I think this belongs in S tier, but there you have it. That is my ranking for all of the reload POIs. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like and subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to join my Discord server, that link is going to be in the description, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Peace.